therapist with UCSB Student Health in the Alcohol and Drug Program. I've been with Alcohol and Drug Program for over 8 years. So I've been working with students for quite some time. I see a lot of students individually. I do a lot of the nicotine cessation work with students. I run groups. And our program, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with what we do, but we have a whole range of services, everything from counseling and education to therapy, recovery, prevention work. So we do a whole range of things, including workshops like It's a Science. Hopefully some of you caught our workshop a couple weeks ago on device and screen management. Let me go ahead and get started. So the topic I'll be covering today is all about vaping. Primarily, I'm going to be talking about vaping nicotine, but I'll touch on vaping cannabis as well, just because that's a trend that we're seeing more and more with students. It seems to be more prevalent these days. So just a couple housekeeping items. First, I think a lot of you had to hit that you were okay with it being recorded this evening. So this webinar is being recorded so people can watch it later. That includes yourselves. If you feel you missed anything or want to come back and look at some of the resources that are posted, you'll be able to find that on our website. You can also ask questions using the Q&A box. You're also welcome to raise your hand if you want to add a question or add a comment. And we'll be sure and try and leave some time at the end if you have any lingering questions or anything you want to know more about. So I'll be dividing this webinar into about 2 broad topics. So first, I'm going to start touching on some of the research and what we know about vaping. We'll talk about nicotine dependence. We'll talk about what the research is telling us and what we know so far. And then in the second half, I'll be talking about moderation and cessation techniques. So we'll touch on the benefits of quitting nicotine and also strategies for people who are looking for to cut down on their use or to stop altogether. All right, so I have a few questions sprinkled throughout. Originally, I was going to do these in polls. I've decided to go ahead and just kind of ask you to take a moment to reflect on them as these questions come up. But first, just sort of checking in with yourself. If you're somebody who is vaping anything, this information may apply to you in different ways. You may have a family member who vapes. It may be you who's using these products. You may work with students who are vaping. So I imagine we have a bit of a range in here. So this will hopefully be helpful in different ways. And also, if you are somebody who is vaping, whether it's nicotine or cannabis, I want to invite you to just take a moment to think about, if you were to decide to stop, how difficult would it be? Would it be really easy? Would it be kind of easy? Are you not sure? Or would it be somewhere in the more difficult area? And certainly what I found with students is nicotine can be a little bit sneaky, and that often their use starts out as a very recreational, occasional thing. And just gradually over time, it starts to ramp up. And before they know it, actually giving it up, if say they're going home and they want to, stop vaping for a period of time, or they're starting to have concerns, they find that there's a physical dependence that's actually kicked in, making it really difficult to quit. So I have a nice video. I like it. I think it helps to really, in a concise way, talk about how nicotine dependence forms, and also why it's so hard to quit, and why that's so uncomfortable, and why people struggle so much with that.
Ever wondered what's going on in your brain when you puff a cigarette? This is a tale of 2 chemicals, the nice and the not so nice, and what happens when they meet. Nicotine is fast and it's sneaky. Like an Olympic sprinter, it races into the lungs. From the lungs, it enters the blood and reaches the brain within seconds of that first puff. The brain is made up of many cells called neurons. Nicotine actually affects pathways in the brain called the reward pathway. The reward pathway is a normal and important part to our survival. It's the area of the brain which makes us feel good every time we eat or do something we enjoy. Once nicotine arrives at this area of the brain, nicotine attaches itself to the receptor on neurons, like a lock fitting in a key, and this wakes up the reward pathway of the brain. This is where dopamine comes in, the nice chemical. When the reward pathway is activated, dopamine gets released and we feel warm and fuzzy and satisfied. However, too much repetitive stimulation of the reward system can be dangerous, especially with nicotine. Nicotine hijacks the reward pathway, attaching to a nicotine receptor to release dopamine and convincing the brain that we need another cigarette. Every time we smoke, we get that feeling of reward, and so we do it more. This sets up an unhealthy pattern as nicotine tricks the brain into activating those warm and fuzzy feelings with every puff. This causes changes in the brain over time. The longer you smoke, the more and more receptors are created, and each one is craving its nicotine fix. Over time, the body learns that it needs nicotine to feel good, but it can never get enough. That's why it's so hard to quit. The longer we smoke, the stronger the cravings for nicotine become. With no nicotine to bind into nicotine receptors, the reward pathway is not stimulated anymore. This means there is less dopamine. With less dopamine, people get withdrawal symptoms. The good news is that these changes in the brain start returning to normal the longer you go without a cigarette. Getting past the first stage of withdrawal when you quit can be hard, with lots of empty nicotine receptors screaming out for their fix. But the good news is that over time, there are fewer and fewer nicotine receptors as your brain goes back to the way it was before you smoked. If you need help kicking the habit, call QUIT on 137848 or go to www.
All right. So moving on, experts really actually liken nicotine to heroin in terms of its potential for addiction. And I think a lot of times when I'm talking to young people, they don't realize just how addictive nicotine is and what a powerful stimulant it really can be. So I first wanted to move into the ways in which nicotine uniquely impact young people, and particularly the brain of young people. So the brain is actually one of the last organs in the body to develop. It's growing really, really rapidly up until about age 25. And because it's growing so quickly at those ages, people who start to use nicotine actually progress faster to dependence than do adult brains. Use of nicotine in these young ages also wires the brain for addiction, not only to nicotine later on, but for other drugs like cocaine and alcohol. It also disrupts the development of brain circuits that are in the brain that are responsible for attention, learning, and memory. Those often happen in the prefrontal cortex. And also we know that nicotine affects anxiety, irritability. It can lead to sleep disruption. Again, it's a stimulant. It can impact mood, and it can also lead to impulsivity. And these are changes not only that can be happening when people are using these products, but these can lead to some lasting changes. Again, because the brain is so fragile at these ages and it's forming all these pathways. So I also wanted to talk about nicotine and athletic performance. So this is something that comes up a lot with students I'm working with, not only athletes, but anybody who's involved in any sort of physical activity. So it seems to particularly affect two parts of the body the most when it comes to athletic performance. It affects people's hearts, so it increases blood pressure and heart rate. It narrows the arteries around the heart so that it constricts blood flow. The heart has to work harder. And it also really impacts the lungs. So especially for people who are involved in activities where it involves really rigorous exercise, or whether they're really needing their lung capacity to be able to perform at peak level, this can make it harder to breathe. People get out of breath more easily, especially people who are susceptible to kind of having flare-ups of asthma. They may have more coughing and wheezing. And it also weakens the immune system. So this is, not only important for anybody, but, of course, for athletes who are needing to be in top shape and able to perform and to be, participating in their sport, this is a really big deal. So there's a lot of content here. I'm not necessarily going to go through every item, but in the chat, you will find all of these bullet points. But I did want to touch on a few of them. So one is that e-liquids contain a whole lot of chemicals. And one of the things that makes it really hard for researchers to study e-cigarettes is for a couple of reasons. One is that unlike with cigarettes that have been around for a long time, they've been on the market for quite a long time, e-cigarettes are a relatively new product. So while we know quite a bit more than we used to about them, we still don't have the longitudinal studies over many, many, many years of people who are using those products now as they're continuing until they get to older ages. So it makes it a bit hard to know exactly how this is going to impact people's bodies long term. The other reason is there is such a vast array of these products on the market that, what's actually contained in the e-juice that people are using not only varies from one manufacturer to another, but it can really vary from one batch to another. So in terms of trying to study this, it can be really, really challenging for researchers to really figure out, the impact when there's, again, such a range of what's on the market right now. So, a few highlights from this list that I just wanted to touch on. Vaping, researchers have found increased the rate of heart attack, especially people who are both vaping and using cigarettes. Some of the rates of these problems increase quite a bit. So you can see risk of heart attack goes up quite a bit for people who are dually using both. Vaping also causes injury to the small airways of the lungs, so that can lead to inflammation and other lung disease issues. A lot of these products are finding heavy metals both in the juice that people are using and especially in the aerosols. So in these products that people are using, the devices often have metal parts that are being heated really high that are creating the aerosols. And then these toxic chemicals are being released and inhaled. So that can be lead, nickel, iron, tin, copper. It's a really expansive list. And a lot of these metals are linked to really serious health issues. So everything from cancer and lung disease and gastrointestinal problems and a whole host of other health issues. And again, not knowing long-term how this is going to impact people, it's certainly cause for concern. Also, something that I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about is the impact on people's mouths. So when people are smoking these products and inhaling these vapors, it's actually causing inflammation in the cells in the mouth area. So it's leading them to higher levels of gum disease and oral infections. And again, higher when people are dually using vapes and cigarettes. And lastly, I wanted to point to that in October 2019, the first study linking vaping devices to cancer was published, and that was at the NYU School of Medicine, and that was actually done with lab rats, or lab mice rather. And what they did was expose these mice to the aerosols, and they found that they did develop lung cancer and also precancerous areas in other parts of the body. So while these can't directly translate into knowing exactly how these products are affecting people, it certainly shows the need for more research in this area. So, oops. I'm sorry, some technical difficulties. Go back to present. Thanks for bearing with me. Lastly, I wanted this as a standalone slide just because it's such a timely study, but the researchers at Stanford did find that people who vape are 5 times more likely to contract COVID-19. So especially with numbers on the rise, and certainly on the rise in Isla Vista and with college-age population, this is certainly concerning and worth factoring in from people think about personal risk. So with vaping cannabis, like I mentioned, this is becoming a lot more popular. Much like e-cigarettes are largely unregulated and contain lots of different things that people are unaware of and several different chemicals. Similarly, cannabis liquids that people are using in oil pens are also unregulated. So usually these substances have some sort of oil solution that includes additives, solvents, and flavor enhancers. It also includes other things, and those other things are largely unknown. Also, and I imagine a lot of you have, had heard about in the news, there being EVALI or e-cigarette and vaping use-associated lung injury that was brought on, they believe, by vitamin E acetate. So, as of February of this past year, they found that 2,800 people had been hospitalized, and there were 67 deaths. And I don't know that they've been continuing to keep track, but a lot of this was linked to products that were on the black market that weren't being sold legally. So I just wanted to take a moment just to look at the THC content in these vaping devices, because certainly when I'm talking to students, a lot of times they have no idea what it is that they're, just how potent it is, the products that they're smoking or vaping. So in regular weed that people smoke, usually it's about 12 to 33% THC, 33% being on the higher end. But when people are using these oil pens, there's usually 2 different kinds of liquids that they're using: live resin, which is 45 to 50% THC, and distillate, which is 85 to 90. So this is important because, again, a lot of times people may be sharing devices with somebody, they may get more than they bargained for and have a different kind of high, or certainly a much more intense high than they expected, which can be certainly very uncomfortable for people, if not dangerous. I also wanted to talk about the amount of nicotine in these vaping devices. So similarly, a lot of times it can be quite confusing for people to figure out exactly how much they're vaping. Unlike cigarettes, where we know that usually people are consuming about 1 to 2 milligrams of nicotine when they're using one cigarette, oftentimes people are using different strength e-juices. They're maybe sharing a device with somebody else. They may be going through it at varied, variable amounts of time. So it's really hard to calculate. So a lot of times if I'm doing some cessation work with somebody and we're really trying to calculate how much nicotine are you taking in per day, we're having to really get down to, how many milligrams of nicotine are per milliliter, how many milliliters in the container, and then over what time frame are you using it, and really trying to calculate. These products are really strong. So 1 Juul pod is equivalent to 20 cigarettes. One of the things we know about e-liquid juices is before Juul came along, there used to be a harshness with increases in more potent nicotine. So when people, in the earlier versions of e-cigarettes that people were using, there's a lot more lung discomfort. There was more coughing associated with it. People might have been more prone to getting sore throats. And then shortly before 2015, when Juul was getting ready to launch their products, they had engineers who developed nicotine salts, which is a substance that really took away the harshness. So it created a much smoother, more enjoyable experience. It took away, all that discomfort, and higher levels of nicotine. So that allowed them, within the first few years of being on the market, to offer really, really potent products. And again, without, with people being able to comfortably use these, a lot of times there wasn't a clear awareness of just how much nicotine was being consumed when they were using it. Another product that I'll be talking about a little bit later on is puff bars, which have also become quite popular. These are disposable vaping devices. They're less expensive, but they're one-time use. They come in 2 different strengths, but the higher strength is 300 puffs and can contain as much as 2 to 3 packs of cigarettes. So given the popularity of these, again, people are often taking in a lot more nicotine than they're aware of. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of rates of use of nicotine, this was based on some research by the Pew Research Center, and it shows that at least between 2015 and 2018, the highest levels of use were within 10th and 12th graders. But of course, we know that those 10th and 12th graders eventually go into college, and oftentimes their use follows them, and sometimes can ramp up from there, especially once they're not living with family or other people who might be leading them to kind of limit their use. The next thing I wanted to show is, and I thought this was really telling, is the rates of nicotine use over the years. So, thanks to lots of efforts from lots of different organizations and partners over the years, there's been a lot of progress, or had been a lot of progress, in terms of young people using nicotine. And then vaping hit the market. So we know that between 2011, 2015, use of vaping devices between 10th and 12th graders actually increased about 900%. That's before Juul even hit the market. Juul hit the market in about 2015, and the popularity really surged from there. So you can see how the rates start to just really go up quickly. Also wanted to touch on the environmental impact of these products. One of the things that's really unfortunate about them is they're not easy to dispose of safely. And what happens is, unfortunately, a lot of people end up discarding them in ways that end up going into a landfill, or being left in places where these toxic chemicals are, being exposed to the environment. So one of the reasons that it's especially concerning is, again, the puff bar has become really popular. The reason it's become so popular, or part of the reason it's become so popular, is when Juul was first released, they had a whole range of flavors. Thanks in part to a lot of efforts back in this past February, reusable vapes were restricted from offering flavors because they were marketed to youth. And so Puff Bar came into the picture and really filled that need. So there's a whole range of different flavors that Puff Bar offers. Disposable vapes are exempt from that law. And so that's been a real attraction for a lot of people who enjoy that part of vaping. But the problem is, again, they're single use. So it's plastic that's being discarded. Also, all of these devices have lithium ion batteries, which can start to erode over time and leaches toxic chemicals into the environment. There's also potential for explosions. So some of these vaping devices have actually caused fires and explosions. So that's, if that's happening in waste management facilities or landfills, or certainly with people who are involved in waste management, that can be really dangerous. And certainly there's a trickle down effect of, these chemicals then, leaching into water, soil, aquatic ecosystems, et cetera. So again, we're going to start to shift now into some of the moderation and cessation techniques. A lot of these are ones that I use with students. So I invite you, if you are somebody who's vaping or smoking, is to think about how your use has changed since the start of the pandemic. Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Did you start vaping or smoking? Did you stop? For a lot of people, use has changed in some ways that may have been surprising. And I also wanted to pause for a moment and just acknowledge that giving up vaping or smoking is not easy. Most of us know that. And certainly anybody who has firsthand experience knows that this is not an easy process. And if you are somebody who's thinking about stopping, be gentle with yourself. That really is something where you, in a lot of ways, form a relationship with this device. It's something that often goes everywhere with you, that's there when you're struggling. So it can be a really challenging process. And fortunately, there's a lot of resources and a lot of support for people who are ready. So I want to start with moderation, since a lot of times, somebody may not be ready to quit. That may not be something they're motivated for in that moment, but they are looking maybe to cut down for a variety of reasons. So this is a pretty long list. I think this will also be put in the chat for you to look at as we move on. But I wanted to highlight a few, and especially ones that I found are most helpful with students when I'm working with them. A lot of times limiting use to certain places. So this may mean leaving your device at home if you're leaving the house, so that you're not tempted to use it on the go or in the car or as you're walking someplace. Also, setting a time of day that maybe you want to start vaping. So for a lot of people, they don't maybe like that they wake up first thing in the morning and they're using a substance, and maybe they set a certain time, like I'm not going to vape until 11 or 12 noon. So that is sometimes helpful to just sort of set a really specific goal. For some people who are using really high concentrations of nicotine, often switching to a lower concentration juice is a step toward decreasing your overall intake. And also just really changing up your routine or habits. So I'll talk about this more later on, but if you're somebody who vapes at really specific times during the day, just changing things up can be really helpful. So if you're somebody who maybe, again, as soon as you walk through the door after you come home from work, you vape, maybe you go somewhere, you put on some running shoes and you go for a run when you first walk through the door instead of having that temptation of wanting to vape. The other thing that can be really helpful is just putting your supplies away. So, oftentimes those visual cues of seeing seeing the product right there, having that urge, and just the ease of being able to act on it can, lead to more use, versus putting it away, having it out of sight, creates an extra barrier to having to then go and get it and pull it out. So just a word of caution, for people who are looking toward moderation versus cessation is be careful about nicotine compensation. So this can mean you may have put a lot of work into, vaping less frequently throughout the day, but then the problem that can crop up is using more at those times. So taking longer pulls on your vape than you would otherwise, where you're maybe still getting that same amount of nicotine, but just less often throughout the day. And also, we know from the research, there was actually research done at Oxford University that showed that people who more slowly titrated their use or, gradually cut back were actually less successful in quit attempts than people who stopped altogether in one go. So again, it's a very individualized thing. For some people, moderation actually is a way of, working toward becoming healthier. It can build confidence in somebody's ability to make some healthy changes. And for some people, that is a step toward eventually giving it up and cutting it out. And for other people, it may not work as well. All right, so I won't touch on each of these things, but I wanted to bring the slide up because We know that there are so many benefits from quitting. And what I really like about this particular chart is it just shows how many benefits are gained even within a short period of time. So this isn't something where you have to have quit for years and years to see some benefits. Even after 20 minutes, your blood pressure and heart and pulse rate start to return to normal. After 48 hours, your sense of taste and smell begin to return. So there's a lot of health benefits that happen pretty quickly. All right, so again, another question to ask yourself: if you smoke or vape, what are your primary reasons for using these products? And knowing this information can give you clues about what is it doing for you, and how will you manage, if you are looking to quit, how will you manage that in other ways? So if this is something you do when you socialize, how will you manage those or navigate those situations socially when the urge or the temptation is there? Or if you are somebody who vapes to manage stress, what are some other ways that you might manage stress that don't involve vaping or substances? So I'm going to start moving into some quit plan basics or strategies that I would cover with people who are looking to stop vaping or smoking. I also want to say, for people who are looking to moderate or cut down, a lot of these are still going to be applicable and still may be really helpful as you're looking to make some changes. So the first and obvious one, you want to pick a quit date. Often you want it to be sometime fairly soon, but also pick a date that isn't going to be particularly stressful. Choosing to quit on election day, probably not a great idea, but finding a date where you maybe don't have other major life things going on, it's not likely to be a particularly stressful day, that's probably a good day to choose. You also want to throw away all your paraphernalia. That can be hard because for some people, they may feel like they've invested their money in it, they're attached to it, but it really is taking a concrete step and making a firm commitment to making a life change. Also, you'd want to let important people in your life know. So partners, roommates, perhaps family members, anybody who's close to you, who spends time with you. It's helpful to tell them because that way they can be supportive in whatever ways you're needing. They may be able to hold you accountable. If they're somebody who vapes or smokes, they're going to be hopefully less likely to offer you a vape or, offer you their vape. So it's good to fill them in on what your plans are. Also, it's a good time to think about NRTs. I'll touch on this very briefly a little bit later on. But for a lot of people who are really nervous about the quit process or who suspect that there's a pretty big dependence there, NRTs can really help mitigate some of those uncomfortable withdrawal symptoms. And for a lot of people can help them be more successful in quitting and also considering getting some help. So our program certainly provides services for students who are looking to quit nicotine or cut down. But there's a lot of different resources for help. I know in the chat, there'll be posted some resources for whether you're a staff or faculty member. Oftentimes through insurance, there's different programs that are often included in your insurance. And then there's a lot of services free of charge. The California Smokers Helpline is a great place to start for anybody in California looking to quit. And I'll also touch on some apps that I recommend later on as well. All right, so another question, something to reflect on. If you are thinking of cutting down or quitting, what is motivating you? So the reason I ask this question is it's really important to be clear on your reasons for wanting to quit. Again, because this can be a challenging process, really staying true to what is motivating you. What are your reasons? What's most compelling? What's going to keep you on track, especially during those difficult moments when you're wavering? That's really important to be clear about. So whether it's, really being concerned about your health and wanting to feel healthier. For a lot of people, it's, I want to save money. I'm spending quite a bit of money on this. For some people, it's concerns about their mood. It's maybe somebody in their life is really not happy with the fact that they're smoking or vaping. Maybe they want to do better in school and they want to find other ways of managing stress and anxiety. So being clear about that is an important part of this process. Also knowing your triggers. So part of planning for how you're going to successfully quit is knowing what sorts of things throughout your day are triggering to you. So they usually fall into into three categories. There's emotional triggers. So this can be times you're bored, times you're anxious, times you're, really frustrated can be a trigger. Right now, a lot of students are experiencing loneliness just with feeling more isolated with the pandemic. There's everyday triggers. So for a lot of people, it's waking up first thing in the morning. Maybe vaping is associated with driving in the car or studying, just certain times during the day. And then there's social triggers. And I find for a lot of students I'm working with, times that they're going out and socializing, especially if they're drinking alcohol or their friends are all vaping, those can be really hard moments and times that they're experiencing really strong urges to want to vape. So again, being really clear about your triggers means that you can be strategic about either trying to avoid those triggers or knowing what you're going to do when you encounter those triggers to manage the urge or the craving that comes up. So there's a lot of ways to manage urges and cravings. I like this chart and I like this concept because it's just easy to remember. But the 5 Ds have been around a long time. So the first, delay. Just give it some time. Urges usually, they come and they go and they don't last that long typically. So just biding your time somehow, waiting it out can be really helpful. Drinking water can be helpful. Deep breathing, and we'll talk more about mindfulness as it relates to cessation, can also be really helpful and coping with those urges and calming the body. Doing something to distract. This can take a million different forms. Calling a friend, playing a video game, going for a walk around the block, doing some drawing, writing, anything. And also along the lines of calling a friend, talking about it with somebody. So turning to somebody that you care, who cares about you, who you trust for support. So this is a concept we regularly teach students. It's called urge surfing. So the idea is imagining urges are like a wave. So just like ocean waves, they arrive, they crest, and they subside. They don't last forever. Very similarly, urges do the same thing. They do come, they increase and they ramp up, but then they subside. So the idea being you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. It really pulls in a lot of mindfulness-based techniques. So the basic strategy of going about this is watching the breath without trying to alter it, paying attention to your thoughts, noticing where in your body you're experiencing cravings, taking a moment to just focus on where that craving is being felt, what's going on with that, moving to different parts of the body, that you're experiencing the craving, and just being curious, not trying to push away the craving or those feelings, but just noticing it until it subsides. So we know from the research that mindfulness has been shown to be really helpful with people who are trying to quit vaping or smoking. And it can certainly help people who are looking to moderate or cut down or make changes as well. So I invite you to participate in a short mindfulness exercise. This is under 3 minutes. Part of why I like to choose this one or why I chose one that is short in the interest of time, but is also that, a lot of times people have this feeling that they have to carve out a big chunk of time to do meditation, and it really doesn't take long. There's a lot of ways to incorporate mindfulness or meditation in your daily routine, whether it's a short guided practice like we're going to do right now, or whether it's, just being mindful as you're walking somewhere or while you're doing dishes. So I invite you to go ahead and do this short meditation with me. It's under 3 minutes. If you are somebody who vapes or smokes, you might pay attention if you're noticing any urges or if you're having any thoughts. And without trying to push it away or without judging them, just acknowledge them and notice where you're feeling them.
By bringing your attention into your body. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable to you. You can notice your body seated, wherever you're seated, feeling the weight of your body on the chair, on the floor. You can take a few deep breaths. And as you take a deep breath, bring in more oxygen, enlivening the body. And as you exhale, have a sense of relaxing more deeply. You can notice your feet on the floor. Notice the sensations of your feet touching the floor, the weight and pressure, vibration, heat. You can notice your legs against the chair, pressure, pulsing, heaviness, lightness. Notice your back against the chair. Bring your attention into your stomach area. If your stomach is tense or tight, let it soften. Take a breath. Notice your hands. Are your hands tense or tight? See if you can allow them to soften. Notice your arms. Feel any sensations in your arms. Let your shoulders be soft. Notice your neck and throat. Let them be soft. Relax. Soften your jaw. Let your face and facial muscles be soft. Then notice your whole body present. Take one more breath. Be aware of your whole body as best you can. Take a breath, and then when you're ready, you can open your eyes.
All right, so this particular mindfulness recording came from the Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA, the Mark Institute. I have included in the chat several meditation resources. So for those who are looking for more, this will give you a lot of different places to look for various streaming meditations. There's a lot of free content that's really great that you can find online. So I've provided some recommendations. So coming back to our cessation strategies, these are some other tools and that I often will cover with students. Exercise, paying attention to your nutrition, getting really good quality sleep. These are all really, really important, certainly for self-care in general, but especially when somebody is trying to make this sort of change. Really paying attention to these areas and taking care of yourself in these ways can be helpful. Also positive thinking. So really identifying a few encouraging statements that, especially when during those tougher times, that people can say to themselves can be really helpful in terms of just providing, one's own motivation and encouragement along the way. Also finding other ways to manage stress, whether it is mindfulness meditation, whether it's, just strategies like taking warm baths or making tea or journaling or drawing. There's a lot of different ways to manage stress without substances. Also, I think I talked about switching up the routine as a way of being helpful. Additionally, because people who vape are, really accustomed to this hand to mouth movement and tendency to want something in their mouth, I've had really good success with having students get things like gum, mints, stocking up on crunchy foods, using toothpicks. That can be really satisfying to that urge to kind of want to put something in their mouth like that. And for some people, using a nicotine log, especially if they're not really sure where to start, they're not sure what their triggers are, they're a little unclear about their patterns, they may not really have a clear sense of how much nicotine they're using. Sometimes taking a week or two to log use and becoming clearer on those things can really then help plan and strategize when people are ready to implement a cessation plan. I wanted to touch on common nicotine withdrawal symptoms. So usually withdrawal symptoms will peak within 1 to 3 days, and then after 3 to 4 weeks, they really start to subside. So it's usually a combination of both physical and psychological symptoms. As you can see, there are quite a few, different people experience to some extent different things, but usually there's some discomfort. And this can happen not only with people who are suddenly stopping nicotine altogether, but even people who are decreasing their use. Can experience some of this discomfort. So sometimes headaches, irritability, sleep difficulties, appetite disruption, GI issues. There's a whole host of things that can happen. And again, it sort of varies depending on how much nicotine people are using and how they're going about cutting down. And this is where NRTs can be helpful. So nicotine replacement therapies can take a few different forms. The main ways are gum patch and lozenges. There's also inhalers that are on the market that people can use. It can be a little bit confusing, even though these are, relatively safe products. They're available over the counter. Sometimes it's hard for people to know where to start, what combination or which one to use. And that's where, turning to somebody either like through our program, you can ask a pharmacist, a doctor, even the California Smokers Helpline. It's you could definitely get some guidance, and that's recommended if you're not sure how to go about using these. But they certainly can increase chances of success. And I find they're especially useful for, of course, people who've used them before and had good success. For people maybe who have tried several times to quit before and haven't been able to, and maybe if they haven't used NRTs before, it's certainly worth trying. And also for students whose nicotine is really high, who are really worried about, experiencing some of these really uncomfortable withdrawal symptoms. So I also wanted to come back to cannabis. Often I know when I'm talking to students, there's this notion of cannabis not necessarily being something that's that people form dependence around, or if anything, it's just a psychological dependence. But what we know is there can actually be a lot of discomfort in abruptly cutting out cannabis from somebody's life if they're somebody who's a regular daily smoker or vapor. So these are some of the really common withdrawal symptoms that people may experience. They usually last about a week or two, but they can be pretty uncomfortable. So it can really throw out people's sleep and appetite. They may just feel on edge, irritable, not great. But we also know from the research that within a couple days of not using cannabis, people's brain receptors start to return to normal, and within 4 weeks, actually regain normal functioning. So slip-ups are really common. When people are trying to quit, it often takes several attempts. Slip-ups are often a part of this process. It can feel discouraging, but it's also helpful to know that that it doesn't derail everybody's progress, somebody's progress when they're trying to quit. But there are some really good strategies people can use to get right back on track. So the first thing sounds really obvious: stop vaping or smoking right away. Be gentle with yourself. Don't beat yourself up. It happens. And often just getting back to the basics. So all the things I just covered, of you really doubling down on, okay, how am I going to manage those urges? How can I change up my routine so that I can be more successful? How can I learn from what happened when I slipped up? Did it happen when I went out with certain friends, or did it happen when I was out drinking one evening? Maybe can I avoid that thing for a while? Can I take a break from drinking? Or maybe I need to spend time with other friends right now who are more supportive. And also considering getting help. So if it's something where maybe you've tried to do it on your own and it hasn't gone so well, enlisting the help of somebody who has some expertise in this area, whether it's through the Alcohol and Drug Program, through insurance, anywhere. So this will also be listed in the chat. These are some additional recommended apps. I find that especially for younger people, for college students, this can be really helpful. These are free and anonymous. Often they just feel convenient, accessible. So I would encourage people to give these a try, and it could be in conjunction with maybe other help that they're getting. But for some people, this is definitely helpful. And lastly, we come to questions. So I posted, or my colleagues have posted quite a few resources in the chat. So I invite you to peruse those. Maybe pull out anything that you want to learn more about. I believe that there should also be a video and an article that I recommend if you're wanting to learn more, that I think has really great information. We do have a survey. It's very brief, so we hope that you all will stick around and fill that out. It's only 4 questions. We also have a self-assessment. So if you are somebody who vapes or smokes and you want to take that self-assessment, it's a great way to just take a closer look at your habits and how they're working for you. And as a reminder, this will be recorded. It should be on our website soon. So if you want to go back and catch any portion, or if you miss some of the resources that were posted, that may be a great opportunity to go back and find them. So I'm not sure if there are any questions. Let's see. Also, references will be posted in the end as well. So anybody who wants to check out some of these references, there is a lot there, but it will certainly direct you to quite a few resources. If anything jumps out to you about any of the content that I covered, you can find out a lot more by checking some of that out. So there is a question, what can we do to help someone quit? So that's a great question. I would suggest, I'll just offer my general thoughts, but if you're feeling really stuck and you want some very specific wording, and again, I'm not sure of the context. I don't know if this is a partner or a son or daughter or a friend or a roommate, that could be, I don't know who it is that you're talking about, but often as a friend, really just coming from a place of, I'm concerned about you, and opening up a dialogue with them. and being supportive. And different people may be at different stages of feeling ready to consider quitting. Some people may be in this place of, I'm just not really even thinking about it right now. I don't want to quit. Some people may have some concerns, like I mentioned, about their health, or maybe they've been talking about it for a while and they're just not sure where to start. So really sort of trying to take into consideration where they are and being supportive of moving them to that next stage. And if they are somebody who's looking for some help, hopefully some of the resources that I posted today might be a good place to direct them. And if they're looking for something that's really low key and anonymous, maybe checking out an app, or, you know, calling somebody on the California Smokers Helpline. If they're a student, certainly our services are free and available. They can call us, that we can schedule with them. All our services are remote right now. So for a lot of people, it's really accessible. They don't even have to leave their house to get that help. But yeah, I mean, I think really just being there and try to be encouraging and supportive, you know, and with any sort of change we're hoping or wanting somebody to make, you know, sometimes the more we push, sometimes the more somebody tends to kind of shut down and not necessarily be open to that help. So, but certainly if the conversation isn't going anywhere and it's a more serious concern, because of course some of these health effects associated with vaping are really concerning. So if it is a young person, especially if you're a parent or somebody who's really responsible, sometimes maybe getting your own help and how do I approach this and how do I have a conversation and what language and words do I use to try and convey my concern and really move that person toward getting some good help. So I hope that was helpful. And certainly I think you can all see hopefully on my screen right now, my contact information. You are very welcome to get in touch with me. I'm happy to set up a phone call and provide some more specific guidance. And if you have any additional questions, you can reach me afterward as well. Any other questions? I know we've ended about 10 minutes early, but I don't imagine people will mind too much getting on with their evening. But I really want to thank everyone for joining me today, and I hope you had a chance to fill out the survey, and don't hesitate to be in touch if I can provide any more information for you all.